New videos every day. Life, wisdom.
We can observe that in the current state of affairs, we have a huge prevalence, increasing prevalence of chronic diseases, of obesity, and we also have the food and drug industries kind of taking it to the bank, so to speak. These industries are continuing to have huge profit margins. Do you think, from your perspective as a doctor, that these profit margins are coming at the cost of our lives?
Very much so, and it's not that it's necessarily a conspiracy or anything like that. It's probably more of an opportunity being taken advantage of. But yeah, chronic disease is out of control, and the more that chronic disease is studied, the more that we're seeing that it's not something that just happens by chance. We know that there's a mechanism, there's a process to the creation of chronic disease. Heart disease is the biggest killer in this country. And we have a pretty good understanding of how it occurs. It occurs through an inflammatory process. It's not I have too much cholesterol. It's not what many people had proposed in the past. In fact, heart disease is now called a metabolic disease, not a genetic disease. But in calling it a metabolic disease, we have to talk about mechanisms. And the biggest thing that plays into the mechanism is what you're choosing to put into your own body. So are you eating foods that are original foods that are going to have benefits for the body? Or are you eating foods that are highly processed with a lot of additive things in them, which were correlating to actually causing the problem in itself? So yes, the processing and the what's being done to our food and how we're living our lifestyle is making a big difference. Even in the cancer research, they're finding that a good percentage of what causes cancer are lifestyle factors. And we're talking about what we choose to eat, how active we are, and the things that we're exposed to. It's no more than that. And that seems to be the cause of pretty much every chronic disease out there.
Right. And there's kind of two sides of the story where, people say, oh, well, it's up to the consumer to educate themselves and to make the right choices. And if people are eating hamburgers and getting heart disease, then it's their own fault. And I just can't help but realize that, well, I don't think that it's just the fault of the consumer, because we're really got the deck stacked against us. We're up against food industries who continue to put out huge amounts of processed foods. They're prioritizing their profit margin by using the cheapest ingredients, using the cheapest methods of processing, using factory farms so that they can produce more product for less input. And so it really does look to me, well, whether they're doing it on purpose or not, these industries are profiting off of a food industry that's making us sick, and then off of a pharmaceutical industry that is making its money when we get sick and end up taking their drugs. Whether it's, pain pills or medications, or whether it's a prescribed medication to handle our heart disease. And so from your perspective, that we could trace this back to the diet, to the way that people are eating.
Well, we can. First of all, we've gotten caught up in this whole idea that all we need to do is address symptoms. So, of course, we have an industry that loves to do that. And the symptoms aren't necessarily the problem. Even though I don't want people to suffer, you're never going to fix things by simply treating a situation that way. So a lot of it does come on the consumer. We need to be careful not to just call ourselves the victim and give up. So being a little more educated is going to make a big difference. Yes, there are a lot of profits to be made, but we can turn that to our advantage if we start voting with how we purchase things. If you learn a little bit more about how your body works, which is important for all of us, you can't really rely on some of the things you're being told. How does your body really work? How do I get it to work better? What does that take? And if we realize how important food is, and we start asking for and buying the organic and more beneficial foods for us, then the industry for the profit will continue to be in business by providing us those things. So yes, we can talk about the fact that the way that they advertise things and the way that they do their processing is part of the problem, and they do hide a lot of things. We can get into all of that. But but how informed are we at what we really should be taking in? Right. And again, that's where we really have power, is in what we purchase. So if you continue to go into the market and buy this junk, then they're going to continue to produce it because it's profitable. Right. But if I start servicing, say, a farmer's market, or I start asking the market where I shop to have more fresh foods, then those will be available to me. And again, we know that chronic disease is really related very closely to how we live our lifestyle. So we need to start putting together a lifestyle that's going to allow our body to function, and that's how we solve the chronic disease instead of just treating it.
And, back to these considerations about, well, does it fall on the consumer or does it fall on the food industry, and who's really responsible? I think you're right. Certainly we've got to meet halfway, so to speak. But do you think that we're being misled about what's nutritious?
We are absolutely being misled, because those companies are looking at what's most profitable for them, and how do they market, how do they, in a sense, control your behavior, because they do. We all know that. Hopefully people realize that they go make purchases based on the media and all this kind of thing. So as much as anything, it's a level of awareness. It's knowing what's going on, and we do have to take the personal responsibility to be aware of the mechanisms and what it takes to actually create a healthy body. And I think that's really missing. People don't know. They assume that it's okay to eat whatever's out there. They assume that it's okay to not be physically active, to not take care of yourself, that there's a doctor behind the scenes that will take care of you once you let it go. But if you let your health go, that's when you're going to be in trouble. So I do put probably more responsibility on the consumer to make a better choice. I wish we made better choices in political candidates. I wish we made better choices in a lot of things. But when it comes to your health, I don't know anything more important. So probably there should be more effort spent on that.
And I think it's important to recognize, and I'm saying this based on my own journey from going from eating fast food and junk food and processed foods and having no idea about this to where I am today. And one of the things that I think, when we look at the fast food companies and these food manufacturers, they want us buying more of their food. And I think that there is a certain amount of just trying to scare people into not caring, so to speak. So people feel that health is so complex and so confusing. Understanding their body is something they'll never be able to do, so there's just no point in them even looking, so they just don't care about nutrition at all. Where clearly there's a happy medium in there somewhere of, there are a lot of ways that we can educate ourselves that really aren't super difficult.
Yes.
And that it's really, this information isn't so complex that there's no reason that everyone on the planet can't be able to know what a healthy diet is and how to be healthy. That it's really just not that difficult. And so that kind of plays back into my question before about, are we being misled? Why are we kind of being, almost intimidated into just buying what's on the shelf, not really asking questions, taking the drug prescription from our doctor and not really asking questions. And, we've kind of handed over our control, handed over our ability to make choices.
That's the big problem.
To these other people.
Well, in one sense, people, I think, have ignored the fact that we've handed immunity to these big companies for any liability that they might cause damage or harm to us, and I think people don't even recognize that. Many of the vaccine manufacturers have immunity. Monsanto has immunity. We just kind of granted them, well, okay, you just do whatever you want, and we'll say it's okay. But on the other hand, how much do you want the government to do for you? Security is an illusion. Nobody's 100% secure. And you can't just hand everything over to a government entity and expect that it's going to be done for you. It's really upon you to act in your own best interest. What is going to create security for you? What is going to create health for you? And to have a little bit more awareness. A lot of people just take the line that, well, it's your age, it's this, it's that, and they'll start getting accommodated to symptoms and problems and just figure, well, I really have no choice, when you have a lot of choice. Right. So that's where I really want to put it back on the person. Is your body functioning well? Are you symptom free, which would be health? Because it is true that the standard of care is just to tell people they're healthy if a couple lab tests come in range. Mm-hmm. And that's not even close. Mm-hmm. Wellness is a goal. Health is about being self-sufficient, having your body operate the way that it should, and it's quite a doable thing. Mm-hmm. But we're told that it's something that is unattainable unless you take the pill or do something. I think people have to wake up to that fact. Mm-hmm. So it is both sides. And we have to be careful what we just accept at face value and maybe do a little investigation and test it out on yourself.
Right. And, back to your discussion about, how much can we really just hand something over to a governmental agency and expect them to just take care of it for us and look out for us. And so there's, a couple of different considerations. One being the conflict of interest, as you pointed out. Mm-hmm. Now we've granted immunity to companies like Monsanto so that they won't be held responsible if something they produce does end up being harmful. And as we've seen over the years, there have been a couple of times that a new drug, for instance, goes out on the market and they have to recall it a couple years later because it ends up
more than a couple
killing people. When you're thinking about the way that, the people at the heads of these companies are sitting there thinking and they're looking at their profit lines, they know that people's lives are at stake.
They absolutely do. And it's all about profit and risk. I would challenge anybody to pick up a prospectus on a new drug, because in the prospectus, they'll actually write the amount of risk, how much money they're willing to spend, how much money they're willing to lose when they'll pull the drug. It's all in there in black and white, mm-hmm. or sometimes in color. But the thing is that they're not hiding it. And it's not that they're devious people. It's that they want to maximize their profits and minimize their losses. But they do investigate all that, and they do realize that their drug will, in fact, harm some people and perhaps kill people. And, okay, how far do we go with it? Right. So the problem is that the average person feels that, okay, if it's been allowed to be on the market, then it's perfectly safe. And that's where the shortage is.
Right. And I think it's important to, consider that, yes, most people just are probably not going to question something. They're going to assume that it's safe. Mm-hmm. They're going to, feel intimidated by really trying to look at too much information, really trying to understand too much. And I just feel that it's important that we recognize, and ask the question, is it okay for them to prioritize those profits at the expense of our lives? And at what point are these companies profiting too much off of people becoming sick, becoming dependent on pharmaceutical drugs, becoming, as you said, they just have to acclimate to these symptoms. They just have to get used to them. They just have to live their lives with these symptoms. When, we can recognize that many of the symptoms people are experiencing are caused by the food. And then they experience these symptoms, and then suddenly they end up either taking an over-the-counter drug, or they end up with a diagnosis, they end up with a prescription. And, really nailing down that these symptoms, these problems that we're experiencing, this isn't just some random, fluke that suddenly there's all this chronic disease and we just have absolutely no idea why, but that these symptoms that we're experiencing are all linked back to the diet.
Well, they're linked back to lifestyle, and the diet's a big part of that. Mm-hmm. But we have to realize there's a reality here. A company's in business to make a profit. Right. So they're going to focus on that. And I don't think it's even realistic to think that we should be limiting their profits or accusing them of making money or anything like that. But on the other hand, that's where the power lies. If we realize that that company is interested in being profitable, and we don't service that profit. In other words, if I continue to just assume that it's okay to eat aerosol cheese or something, and I keep buying that, well, that company's going to keep providing it because they're making a profit on it. But if I take the step to realize that a processed food like that is probably not holding health benefits for me and probably doing harm, and I stop buying it, then I've eliminated the profit, and that company's going to stop selling that product. So I think you have to use the system in that way, instead of saying, well, I'm gonna try to curtail their profits or attack them or do anything like that. Now, liability is a different thing. If somebody causes harm, I believe there should be a way to take action against them. But again, profits are the way that businesses work, and so that's going to be their focus no matter what we try to do.
Right.
So I think the only answer is really for people to take action the way that they can.
Right. And I certainly see what you're saying, and certainly makes sense that, well, of course, a corporation is going to prioritize their profit. That makes perfect sense. But if I, and I think that that's really the underlying reason that this documentary film we're looking at making is called Slow Kill. Because this isn't, obviously it'd be really obvious if I went out and got a gun and shot somebody,
right,
I had murdered them. But if I am, selling foods and selling pharmaceutical drugs that end up shortening someone's life or leading them down the road that they develop chronic disease, or just leading them down the road that they have a really uncomfortable life, that they have all headaches or this or pain or any of these myriad problems that people experience, that somehow, nobody is responsible for that. I just think it's important that we ask the question, because I think that if we, we can look at the pharmaceutical companies and some of these food companies, and we can point to some things that they're doing, which are, maybe just not ethical or just not fair, but at the point that it has heightened up to a point that people are being affected on a very serious level. The rates of obesity, the rates of chronic disease, I feel like it's kind of past the threshold between this kind of benign companies trying to make a profit. Of course, they're trying to make a profit. I think it's broken that threshold. And now it's important, of course, for us to still be responsible for ourselves and what we do individually, but that we start looking at the system and asking what's wrong with, oversight by the FDA, that suddenly we can't really trust the FDA anymore, and how can we maybe pinpoint some of the actions of these companies and the way that maybe they have intentionally misled us and actually hold them accountable for those things?
Well, accountability is a different thing, and I completely agree with you on that side. I mean, if the company's being completely deceitful, hiding things, not allowing certain information to come to light, or telling you that it's quite safe and they've completely tested, and then we find out later that that's not true, that's a different issue.
Right.
I don't want to put all the companies into that. There are certain companies which we suspect that they're doing that.
Right.
But again, whether or not they're being deceitful, they're going to be looking at their bottom line, which is the profit. And sure, I'd like to make everybody altruistic and have a big world where everybody shares. And
right.
I don't think it's realistic. I think people are going to look out for their own, and as long as they do it in a way that's how would we put it, not only legitimate but responsible or whatever, I think that's fine. But if I'm going to intentionally deceive you, then that's crossing a line, and that's where there should be some liability. I agree, and some placing of fault and perhaps punishment.
And I think a great example of maybe, deceit or just being misled or just not being told is genetically modified foods. Because in our country, we don't know which foods are genetically modified. We aren't told. There's no label on them. So here is a very clear example of where we're just not being fully informed.
True.
We can't know for a fact.
But it's the government that made that determination.
Right. And so maybe there's, and so that's why
that we shouldn't be informed. We don't need to be informed. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They've kind of made this decision that, you don't need to have that full labeling. And so I'm not trying to point the finger at just this company or just that, but I do think that it's worth our scrutiny to look at the system, and between these regulatory agencies that are supposed to be looking out for the consumer and protecting us, and these food industry or pharmaceutical industries, and that we just start maybe taking a closer look at that system in relation to the overall health of America and really the planet, and start to, as you mentioned, holding people accountable for the things that they're doing.
I agree. And again, it goes to both sides. I want to know that I can have some confidence in something I might use as a tool like a pharmaceutical drug. But also, I see so many people that perhaps start on a drug and then don't take the next step. And hypertension is probably one of the best examples. We have so many people come in the clinic, they're on an antihypertensive drug, and they figure that's it. Okay, I'm going to be on this for the rest of my life. Well, why don't we figure out why you have high blood pressure and solve the problem, and then you don't need the drug any longer. It was a good tool for a short term, but maybe it's not appropriate for the rest of your life. Right. And we don't tend to take that extra step, and that's where I want people to be a little more informed and do that. And even further, that let's say a drug like an ACE inhibitor or something for blood pressure is seen to have benefit because it's reducing stroke. So now, okay, that's got a benefit towards something like dementia. Does that mean that drug now becomes the treatment for dementia? Or do I turn around and learn what a healthier lifestyle is so that my blood pressure is regulated normally and I don't have the inflammation? So I want people to do the latter. I want them to learn how to be healthier so they don't have the problems, rather than saying, okay, I've got this tool that I can treat and different things with. Right. But it is both sides, because there are drugs out there that are basically harmful and shouldn't even be out there.
And you made a really important distinction on one of our previous videos, when we're talking about medications and, does a medication, make us healthy? And you've...
Never.
Yeah. And so you've kind of pointed out that, well, no, what makes us healthy is when our body is just functioning and we don't need any medication.
Correct.
And I don't think that people realize that these prescribed and even over-the-counter medications, they have a toxic effect on the body. And so it's not a...
totally benign, yeah.
It's not a solution for the long haul. It's not a solution for the rest of our lives. So
it's life support. You're being managed by somebody else. You kind of giving control of your life to a doctor. It may not be a bad thing. Things have got out of control. So allow that management and get back to some control, but then take over again on your own. That's the step that we need people to do.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me here.
And thank you for joining us. Please be sure to leave a comment and let me know your thoughts. Is it the responsibility of the consumer, the food industry, or the regulatory agencies that are there to protect us? Please be sure to visit us at thetruthtalks.net. I'm Psyche Truth correspondent Karina Rachel. Thanks for watching.